Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track. This is America's leading Formula One podcast, according to my mother, and we're very excited you've joined today. I'm Brian, that's Rob, and...
This is Jacques Villeneuve, and you're listening to the Dirty Side of the Track.
Jack, it's a week early, man. That's next week. You are ahead of yourself. In case the teaser wasn't obvious enough, 1997 F1 World Champion Jacques Villeneuve will be on the Dirty Side of the Track next week. Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about how crazy that is?
I'm not even sure I can, Brian. It was, well, two things. Doing last week's show and sitting on it and not even giving it away, I can't believe we managed it. We might have buried our teaser trailer a little bit too much like a Marvel after-movie credits scene, but a few people did hear it and kind of pinged us and was like, oh my gosh, you've got Jacques Villeneuve on. And we were like, okay, you got the reference. That's good. That's good, but we'll go into it more next week, but... What a roller coaster. What an insane 24 hours from us getting the notice that it was probably going to happen to the frantic WhatsApp of it's happening in 5 minutes. But like I say, just tune in next week because if you want to hear specifically me, not really Brian actually, I've got to give him kudos for this, but specifically me, being a little starstruck and not really knowing how to start a conversation with a world champion. You just got to tune in just for that because, oh man, I nearly swore then, but did I waffle for the first, it's 45 seconds of pure not knowing where my brain wants to go next.
Well, it is hard to figure out what to happen. And I appreciate you, out of the blue, handing me the baton. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Let's not spoil it. Spoil it. But,
unedited, so we don't edit here, as you can obviously tell. So people will have what they need next week. They get it all. And we're going to give you another piece of information in the close of this episode to preview next. That'll just knock your socks off.
Yeah, and just before we move on to this week's News and Social, I did think long and hard about whether I was going to edit it to get rid of that first part when I hand it over to you. But it's like, do you know what? It's two bozos, and we are what we are, right? And I'm not ashamed of the fact that I was a little starstruck talking to Jacques Villeneuve, world champion, 1997, on the Dirty Side. Do we mention that already?
No, next week, here, live, Dirty Side. And by live, I mean podcast live, pre-recorded. Tell all your friends. If you have friends who are kind of into F1, you should be, there's 34 world champions, and one of them's on the Dirty Side this week. But anyway. Let's wrap up the week before the race. It was amazing. Partially because we didn't get in any racist stuff until the race itself. But we're going to talk about it this week. We're skipping it because we're focusing on the race. I loved, capital L loved, Lewis Hamilton throwing some chin music at Max at the end of Silverstone. He basically said, and here's the quote, "Charles did a great job. What a great battle. Very sensible driver, clearly a lot different to what we experienced last year. In Cops, for example, two of us went through no problem. What a battle." Wow. And Max, who I'm becoming an even bigger and bigger Max fan. I can't explain it. You think he's like the villain now listening to Twitter. He's not. He comes out and says in Dutch, and it's translated, so I'm taking it on the translation. "It is a positive that as a driver at 37, you can still learn how to hit an apex." I know. I love it. I love both of it. This is what I live for. This is the Netflix Drive to Survive, but in real time, real life, real season drama. Awesome.
Yeah, and do you know what? I don't mind when it's like this, when it's banter, and it's just a bit tongue-in-cheek, and one says it and the other says it, and it's not some of the more nasty sledging that we've had in years gone by. I'm all for this. I like a good bit of competitive banter. This is what it should be. Yeah, this is exactly what it should be. And I did like the picture of Max smiling like a kid that's just unwrapped his favourite gift at Christmas when he was holding up the piece of the AlphaTauri that had been lodged under his
under his floor.
And it made total sense because I remember watching that lack of pace he was getting, and it wasn't a puncher, as we discussed last week. No one was quite sure what it was, and they said it was damage underneath. It was damage? He didn't go over a sausage curb. Sorry, what's the phrase you're trying to get to catch on?
Sausage curb grande.
Sausage curb grande. He didn't hit a sausage curb grande hard enough to cause undercar damage. So then when you saw this piece of AlphaTauri, which, the irony wasn't lost that it's the sister team, but
nor essentially that it's the logo piece. I mean, it wasn't like you had to figure out the colors. It says AlphaTauri on it.
But by all effects, what had happened is that had wedged in one of those kind of special shaped underfloor pieces that the Red Bull have got, which has given them that insane grip and leading to that top speed. It basically just wedged itself in there and just went, you think you've got aerodynamic properties? Hold my beer.
Oh, that was great. And again, kudos to Max. Big smile there. We did learn a few things. One of them, Rob, I'll let you do the couple big ones, but the one that I thought was interesting, the regs have been updated this week to allow preseason testing to take place outside Europe. I didn't know it had to be in Europe. I didn't realize that was a regulation, that testing had to be in Europe. Well, that's stupid, and I'm happy they updated it. I'm sure it'll still be in Barcelona or somewhere, Portimao or somewhere, close. But now it can be somewhere else at least, so I like the flexibility.
Yeah, and you're leaving me the exciting ones, are you? You're leaving me the
I'm
finance.
trying to be nice here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks. Yeah, the budget cap was increased.
Well, that's important.
Well, it is, but it's not really that exciting, is it? They've just given an increase of 3.1% to allow for inflation. I've got no clue. I haven't got my abacus out to work out if that's in line with inflation or not. It sounds a little low still.
Not enough in the States.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to get some extra pennies to probably keep none of the teams happy, but at least make the FIA feel like they've done something, I guess. But
yeah, and then the technical directive came out on porpoising, and if we don't get a chance to do it now, since no one's really porpoising to the extent it was before, they will have the regs out on porpoising have been pushed to the Belgian Grand Prix. So Spa is the return from the summer break. It's the end of August, and at that point, the oscillation meters will be all set and ready to gauge how much the cars are going up and down. And the last note I have from a sort of regulation perspective and scheduling perspective is it's been confirmed there are 6 sprint races next year. I heard this on the telecast today. Maybe I was wrong because it was like 4 a.m. on the West Coast where I was when I watched, but I'm pretty sure I heard him say 6 sprint races next year. That's a lot. And we're going to talk about the sprint from this week. It wasn't great. I'm sorry. It was okay, but and I like more racing, but I mean, that's a lot. Would you be all right with 6 sprints, Rob?
yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I missed the sprint this week and had to catch the highlight reel on the F1 website afterwards.
How do they do a highlight reel of a 25-minute race? Isn't it just the race?
5 minutes. It was 5 minutes, and literally
Every fifth lap.
No, actually, kind of what it felt like was it was the start when there was a lot of action, and then because it seems like everything, no one wants to take too much of a risk because no one wants to risk not being in the race the following day. So, because they called it out today a couple of times, they said, "Oh, if Charles had this pace, why didn't he throw it down the inside during the sprint? Because he didn't want to take himself out and miss the race. That's why." So, I like the sprint idea. I think it gives a bit of excitement at the beginning, but then once they've all kind of settled into their pattern, it just does feel that they just kind of bring it home. And I'm not sure what you can do about that because you've got the risk and reward element there. Is that if you really get too aggressive and you bin it, then you're not going to be on Sunday when there's a lot more points up for grabs. So yeah.
Well, we'll talk more about the sprint in a second. I do have a couple of notes. F1 22 is out now, the new game. It's been out for about a week. I have not downloaded it yet. I plan to. I'd love some Dirty Side listeners' thoughts, whether it's worth it. We're at F1 Dirty Side. Let us know if you're playing the new F1 game and what you think about it. Because as we've talked about on this here Pokey podcast, there have been older versions where you were able to play like in classic cars at different tracks, which was tremendous. And then they got so focused on the career modes that a lot of that fell away. And so I'd love people's thoughts on the new game. So I saw this note a week ago. We didn't get it in last week in a large episode, but Red Bull is branching out into hypercars, and they're going to create a 1,100 horsepower V8 hybrid in 2025, and they're only making 50 at the starting price of £5 million. The starting price. Like, are there options on a £5 million car? Like, you don't get radio. Like, I'd like the 6-disc CD changer, please. That'll be an extra $50. I'm like, come on. Like, start. What do you not get for £5 million? That's the price. It's fully loaded.
Yeah, I don't get that either, but I saw that as well. It's kind of like, I don't even know. I'd be too scared to drive it. Like, I just, it'd be one of those cars.
Be rich.
Even if you're rich, right? You just park it on your driveway, you just look at it and you shine it every now and again and say, look at that.
No.
Where do you take a car like that?
Everywhere. And
no,
yes,
you don't.
You show it off.
Some idiot crashes into you in some like $50 Toyota Corolla and you've got your $5 million Red Bull that's just been binned. It just... You see it all the time. You see these guys that buy the hypercars, and like, there's a video of like 1 minute later, and they just like driven it into a wall, or
Yeah, but it's always people coming out of Cars and Coffee, and it's a Ford Mustang, and they say their tire pressure was off by 2 psi. That's literally what they say every time. But anyway, a couple great videos this week. One was on Verstappen.com. Max took driver Fabio Wibmer, who's a biker, MotoGP guy, around the Red Bull ring in an F1 two-seater. So, first of all, Red Bull has an F1 two-seater, and it's like a F14 cockpit. So there's one in front, Max, and then the dude behind, in this case Fabio, right behind him. Ferrari has a three-seater that I've seen them do on their test track. I've watched Charles take people before. This is a long time ago. And you're in the front, and then the two passengers are backwards a bit and on the sides. And all of those rides look scary as hell. I mean, like, really just utter scary. And this guy, Fabio, who basically risks his life daily, was bouncing around back there. His head was, when Max would brake, his head would almost hit the front. When he'd accelerate, it'd go flying back, and on every corner, his head's bouncing around. And when he gets out, he actually says, my neck, oh man, my neck. It was like one lap. So again, to anybody who doesn't believe that Formula One drivers are athletes, you are wrong. It was an amazing video. I do recommend it. It's very short, 3-4 minutes. Check it out. But the one that I also watched, which was dropped like the day of the British GP, and I didn't see it right away. George Russell, Johnny Herbert going around Silverstone in different cars. They just had like a different car challenge on Sky Sports F1. If you've seen it, just pass on it. It's not great. I love George in this video, but it's not worth your time. And the last thing before we get into the race, and I turn it over to Rob to start us off, if any of the Dirty Siders are near Folly Beach, South Carolina, outside Charleston, there is a fellow Dirty Sider named Pat who has a coffee company called Dead Low Coffee Company. Apparently it's amazing. Plus, the guy who runs it, Pat, will be out there in his Dirty Side merch. So everybody, check it out. It is supposed to be very good. So thank you, Pat.
Supposed to be. That's a ringing endorsement.
Why don't you drink coffee? And I've never had it.
It doesn't matter. You build it up anyway. You say it is the best coffee.
He's not a sponsor. He's not a sponsor. He's a friend. I mean, like, let's take her easy here. And if you'd like to be a sponsor, anybody, please let us know at F1 Dirty Side on Twitter.
You could be the first sponsor. You can be a trailblazer, and where you go, others will follow. Anyway, right, let's get through to... So race week started. We only had one practice to decide what we were going to do when we wanted to make our fantasy selections. And it was difficult to kind of see what was going on, although actually looking back in hindsight now, FP1 was a pretty good indication of where things were going to go, because Max was fastest, Charles was looking good in second, Lewis and George both put in solid displays in the Merc, and K-Mag looked quick. So hold that thought till we get through to the race later.
Put a bit in that.
The only kind of thing of real note then is poor Orlando pulled over with his... his car wasn't on fire as much as what we'll talk about shortly with Carlo and his Ferrari, but he did basically say that his bum was getting warm and he wanted to get out of the seat pretty quick.
So I missed practice. I was on a plane, I was at the airport, and I missed that part. Was Ted Kravitz really as crazy about the fire in the bottom as I read on Twitter, or was that inaccurate?
He seemed to love it quite a lot, but... there was a little bit of smoke coming out, and Lando sort of mentioned on the radio that he was a bit uncomfortable, but it didn't really seem to get that much... it didn't look that bad, let's be honest, but Ted was all over it.
Yeah, and then quali started, and I got to say this, shout out, I put it on Twitter, but I was on the plane, and thankfully the United flight I was on had, the TVs in your seats, and so I'm watching it, and when they showed the tires... And I've been waiting a couple hours for the quali to start, and they show the tires. I look to the people to my left and to my right, and I'm thinking, should we talk about tires? We should talk about... I want to talk to you about F1 tires. And they looked at me like, please, don't talk to me about F1 tires. And so I read the room, and I didn't. But it would be a great, great icebreaker. But anyhow, Rob, tell us kind of how Q1 started.
It really wouldn't be a great
It would be great.
No, it wouldn't. It really wouldn't.
Hello, attractive person next to me. I'd like to talk about tires. Oh, really? You would?
Is this something you've grown into, or did, like, when you hung out at bars when you were younger and the really attractive woman came in, is your icebreaker about, like, C1 compound or something? I mean...
Works every time.
Yeah, I'm sure it does.
10% of the time, every time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, right. Q1 in quali, set a theme that we're going to revisit multiple times over this weekend, was track limit carnage.
Oh my gosh. I love the fact they're enforcing it, but did they not tell them at the drive? Did Seb walk out at this part of the driver briefing and everyone stopped paying attention?
I just think, I can't remember now, someone can remind me, maybe you'll remind me, Brian, but there's an ex-driver that tweeted that basically said, I think you retweeted it from our account, which is, stop designing tracks where going off track is faster. Like, that, I mean, that's the only reason why they're really enforcing the track limits, right, is that especially one of those corners, the slingshot effect of going offline is faster. Well, stop making tracks like that, and then you won't have to enforce these stupid rules where people are a millimetre over a white line, and
well, but also this year's cars have bigger tires, and they have those winglets over the tires as well. The visibility to have any clue where your wheel is actually falling is so much lower than in years past. And so to then have the white line actually mean the track limit for the first time in a while and be serious about it, as you said, at corners where going outside of it is better, I feel like they didn't make that message clear because it sure didn't settle in the whole weekend.
No, it really didn't. So we had Q1, we lost both Aston Martins, Latifi and Zhou, and Danny Rick.
And
we're going to get to the silly season is going to be in force soon, and I don't know what his contract situation is, and maybe everyone's safe at McLaren until the end of the season, but I'm not sure how much longer we see Danny Rick in a McLaren. And I know Mark in Australia is going to be upset about this, but
no, he's a pretty big a realist, and I think he would agree. The question I have is that you didn't mention is how many times now have the Aston Martins gone out in Q1 in a row? It's at least 2, if not 3, and then they have somehow, whether the other teams are getting better, it just feels like they're getting worse. And I know it's a relative thing. Maybe it's the same car, and teams are getting better. But Aston Martin, since they've become Aston Martin, have every race gotten gradually worse. I don't understand it. Like, when they were Racing Point, and Checo was winning for them in Bahrain at the end of the season, and Lance was on the podium with him, since then, it's been a very serious decline in a year and a half. I mean,
yeah, but it's
every
the new
race.
regs. It's the new regs as well, isn't it?
But every other team has the same new regs.
Yeah, but look, someone the size of Merck didn't quite get it right, and they're somehow kind of pulling podiums and points out of the fire.
They didn't get it right, but the only driver to finish every race this year is Lewis, and they're third in the constructors, and they've been consistently near the top, even without getting it right, and now they're getting it right.
Yeah,
Aston Martin has done nothing.
No, but exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Like a team that had all of the resources and have dominated the constructors for since the dinosaurs, they didn't get it right. And it feels it's not luck. It isn't luck. It's highly skilled professionals trying to work this aerodynamic stuff out. But Aston didn't get it right, and I don't know how. And I think if you got it really wrong, then upgrades aren't enough. They're just going to start eating into it, and you just look at kind of.
That's a good point.
Williams last week kind of gave a little bit of a ooh. We were talking about Latifi getting points. It's maybe this is the start of something. Yeah, it wasn't.
But last year had the old regs with some slightly different changes to it, and those screwed them too.
Yeah,
and
true,
so
it's
just they have one of the sexiest cars on the grid, and it's just I challenge them to move forward. The dirty side is thrown down the gauntlet, Aston Martin. Let's see what they do.
So then, Aston Martinless, we move on to Q2 and more track deletions. I got bored hearing about time deletions, lap deletions, whatever you want to call it. Biggest loser in Q2 was Lando, who basically had all of his laps that he's ever run in F1 deleted, ended up with a negative time, I think. I mean, it was crazy. He ended up being something not only was he eliminated, but he was eliminated with a lap time that was 20 seconds adrift, because I think it was only an out lap or a warm-up lap that counted. So, yeah, he didn't do too well. Both AlphaTauris gone, and the commentary team kind of picked in on this and said, what's happened to Pierre Gasly? Because last year his star was on the rise and he was the big new thing, and maybe he's going to be really kind of putting down a marker for a big drive in a big team next year. And this year, not so much.
Well, listener Paul M., I think, in an earlier episode, threw down the gauntlet and said, is Yuki better than Pierre at this point? And that started our hashtag Pukey conversation. And, I'm rarely ever good at predicting what's going to happen in F1. But on the plane, sitting there, eating my pretzels, I said to myself, well, Pierre always has bad luck in the sprints, so this is not going to be good for him tomorrow. And we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Valtteri and Alex were out as well. And then Q3. What happened to the Mercedes? Let's just do that first, right? Hamilton goes off, George goes off.
Have you seen any of the videos that they've done? Because you were on a flight or you were all over the place. Have you seen any of the analysis that they did on the Hamilton thing?
No, but it looked like both of them lost the rears in a corner, and everyone said it was wind. I thought it was aero challenges, but am I wrong?
So I haven't seen it on George, but there was a good... I'd have to look it up again now. Apologies to the person who I'm forgetting, but I saw a YouTube video where they basically were looking at wind speed direction on the track at the exact moment that Hamilton goes into that corner, and they're basically talking about how as the car sits into that corner and the aero is fully loaded and the tyres are gripping in a particular direction, a gust of wind comes kind of across that and basically says to the aero, "You think you're generating downforce right now? I got other ideas."
What's a gust of wind? Is a monarch butterfly farting and they go off the track? I mean, come on now.
Enough wind, because Austria is renowned for being a windy track, and they did some really good analysis and said, look, as he comes in, because it just looked bizarre. It wasn't like one of those ones where the back end steps out like because he's put the beans down too early.
Right.
It was more like the car was settled into the corner and then suddenly it wasn't. And
same with George's, though.
And then
George's
he snaps back. Similar. Yeah, and it might be. I didn't see the same for that, although I did see a good meme that after Hamilton had gone off, crashed, got the red flag, and it had restarted, there was a meme where it said George's team radio, and George had said to the team, Lewis has gone off and crashed off and caused a red flag, and the team radio came back and said, copy that, George.
Oh man!
You gotta love the internet.
You do. That is sometimes fantastic. The Haas boys nailed it, and from now on, I think I'm calling them the Haas boys. They're like the Duke boys from Dukes of Hazzard at this point. It's the Haas boys.
The Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah, Dukes of Hazzard. Nailed it, 7th and 8th. Max took pole for the sprint. Do I have that right?
Well, so with that, Max took
yes, he did.
pole. So. Max,
oh God! Please, not the poll. Let's not debate what. Poll
well, not the poll. But oh my gosh, I do not know, and I'm waiting for our friend Blake that came on the other week to look at the full analysis on this. And if you've already done it, Blake, and I haven't looked at it, I'm sorry. But Ferrari 1-2, Max goes yellow first sector, Max goes yellow second sector.
Right? How the hell does he end up on
excellent.
pole?
I really wanted this to be mixed up for the title challenge, so Max is going to be third. Okay, cool.
Great question.
And then comes across the line. And I kind of sat there with my mouth open for a minute saying, why is Max, that's an error. Why have they put him to the top of the leaderboard? He's just in 2 yellow sectors. How's he at the top? That third sector must have been like nuclear.
Yeah, it was beyond purple. Can we explain for some of the newer listeners? So there are 3 sectors to a racetrack. And as cars go around each sector, they give them a color. And at the bottom of the timing graphics, you'll see it broken up. And it'll say very small, S1, S2, S3. But you'll see them fill up as they go along. And there are 3 colors. I think they use 3. Right? Purple,
yellow, green,
and yellow.
And purple, right?
Yeah, there might be others, but we only know those at least. And so purple is the track best. And so what's fun to watch is, especially because Max is really on it right now, when like Charles will be out, he'll have a green and then he'll have a purple, which means he has the best first sector. And then shortly thereafter, it'll go green, and then you'll see Max will have purple for S1, which means Max bested him in the first sector. And so green is your personal best, but may not be track record for this event. And at this point, it's a quali session. And yellow is not as good as you've been before. So to Rob's point, Max was not as good as he's been before himself twice. And then still came across best.
Well, exactly. And Max's previous time that yellow is comparing against still wasn't good enough for pole. So he's down on not just himself,
right,
but obviously down on the 2 Ferrari boys as well.
What?
So Ferrari have got to be high-fiving and popping champagne at this point, going, yeah, 1-2 lockout, baby. And then all of a sudden, boom, he delivers the third sector.
You're right, to go yellow, it's almost like he cut a corner, no one noticed. Like he's I'm going to take this corner off, and went straight through the grass, and everyone's like...
Wacky races, Dick Dastardly got his extra turbo button out and just floored it, but... No, I mean, respect. Someone that can do that and nail a third sector like that to bring home pole was That was fantastic. And then we get to sprint, which I'm going to have to completely hand over to you because my kids had a swim meet all weekend and I was basically standing pressing a stopwatch and stopping a stopwatch while kids were jumping in and out of water while the sprint was going on, which was very selfish of the swim club to arrange a meet while the sprint race was going on. I saw the 5-minute highlights afterwards, but I'll let you take us through
it. I mean, really only 2 notes for me. I was watching it, and again, apologies that I wasn't all on it. I had a family thing out on the West Coast. I did watch it, and there were 2 things I noted. So Max starts out, cuts Charles off quickly, kind of closes him out. It felt very reminiscent of Carlos on Max. Like, Max sees a Ferrari coming. He's like, oh, you want the wall again? I'll give you the wall again. And it was one of those type of things. And then he pulls away off into the future, and no one sees him. Have a nice drive. Adios. And then Carlos and Charles go after it. Hashtag Charlos. They go after it nonstop against each other for a couple laps. And it is getting spicy. And you're wondering, like, are they going to come together? Like, this could actually, they could take each other out here. And at this point, Max is so far off, it doesn't matter. Like, the race is done. Like, it's finished at this point. And so the Ferraris are just competing with each other. They have to figure out strategy at Ferrari. And reliability. We'll get to that in a second. They have to figure it out. Like, the we take no stand doesn't work. You need to take a stand on something. Whether it's how often you let them race, who goes first, whether it's there's a number 1 or number 2 driver. Just make something up as opposed to nothing. And the other note I mentioned Pierre Gasly, and I don't have a stat on this. I'm sorry. I wish I had a SAP stat for it, but I don't. I will make one up in my head. It feels like 74 out of 76 sprint races so far. There haven't been that many. It feels like Pierre Gasly goes out on the first lap, and it's not usually his fault. Someone hits him. He gets into a tangle. I remember from Italy last year, both sprint races this year, he has gone off track in the first lap, and it has cost him dearly. So, Rob, to your point on people like Charles not willing to risk it in a sprint, Pierre is out there balling out, and it's not working for him in the sprint races. Oh, anyway, that's the sprint. My sprint recap in a nutshell.
Thank you. I feel like I was there now, so I didn't.
It was faster than the F1's version.
So then we got to the race itself today. So actually, just before we stay, I was down the. This is turning me into an alcoholic, this thing. But I was down the pub with Ben. Ben, that was on our DRS. A number of episodes again now. Who actually we found out lived near me. So he came down the bar. We watched the race. We sat down to watch it, and we both said at the beginning, heart wants a Ferrari win. Head says Max drives off into the distance. So, race starts. Clean start. Max gets away. It's like, here we go. Because very quickly he was beyond DRS before it was even activated.
Very quickly.
So I was like, this is going to be it. So that's all that's going to happen. And then Checo. There's been a lot of debate in this week about this buttoning down of the rules as to what constitutes being ahead in a corner.
Oh, God.
I watched a video.
Oh, yeah.
I watched a video the other day of somebody that was saying the problem is the 2 rules seem to contradict each other because if you watch the rules of what if you're overtaken on the inside, what constitutes the apex and what constitutes being ahead versus if you're overtaken on the outside and what constitutes the apex and what constitutes being ahead, those 2 interpretations actually don't jive together. So, depending on whether you're...
Correct, they don't.
Depending on whether you're the overtaker or the overtakee, you may or may not get a car's width. Anyway.
It is.
So, regardless of leaving a gap, I'm sorry, but when I saw Perez going for the outside of that corner, you're like, it's the beginning of the race. The cars are loaded with fuel. The guy on the inside is surely likely to understeer. So why, Checo? Why are you being so aggressive on that corner on the outside? So I know George gets the penalty, but I think Checo does himself in there.
Really? So I would disagree.
Yeah.
I would say, A, to your question on why, Checo had a lap time deleted in quali and was fighting from the back the whole weekend. B, if you remember maybe 2 years ago, I thought it was last year and then I rethunk and I think he was in the Racing Point 2 years ago, Checo had a really spicy Austrian GP where he was pushed off track into gravel, I think by Charles, but again, it's been a couple years. He then 100% came back with a vengeance. I think it was on Lando. And again, please, at F1 Dirty Side, clean me up here. But he definitely has had his share of 5-second penalties given to him and given to people who've done things to him on the Red Bull ring. So I felt like...
sorry. George's penalty was absolutely right. It was George's fault.
Yeah.
But why did
not?
Checo put himself into a position where he... Because if you sit back and watch the race, right?
He's waiting for George to back out. He's waiting for George to see him there, get off the throttle early so he doesn't understeer into him. George is like, I'm holding this corner.
Riddle me this, Batman.
Yeah.
So take a look at all the cars that get given a penalty in that situation, right? A 5-second penalty...
Oh, it's much better than getting out of the race.
Much better than going off into the gravel and spinning around, right?
I totally agree.
Checo's blatantly got more pace than him. Just be patient. Just be patient for one more corner, because it was actually the next sequence of corners where all the overtaking was being done. That one was the showboating, kind of I'll show you type corner. You didn't need to take him there.
So for North American sports fans, I got to make a quick two quick analogies to other sports. One, I agree 100% with you. And in hockey, they will actually make the penalty and the fine, they'll align it to the outcome. So they will wait and see if someone's hurt from a check or from a fight, and they will then up the penalty depending on the outcome. And I don't like that off the cuff, but it makes a little bit of sense. So here, George's 5-second penalty is nothing because Checo was out of the race a couple laps later. So if anything, the FIA should have taken the hockey approach and said, F this, F1, we're going up, we're going to have 15 seconds or so. I don't know. But 5 seconds is not enough. I agree with you. The risk-reward doesn't balance. The other thing I'd highlight is this whole I'm allowed to be at this point alongside your car and I have the right to the apex argument. This is exactly what the NFL has been working on for 4 years or 5 years. What is a catch? And is it you have to have control of the ball and then do a football move, 1 foot down, 2 feet down? You have to not let the ball touch the ground. You have to cradle it. You have to hold. It is the most fundamentally obvious thing in the world. From motorsport to football, is it a catch? Have you made a pass? Do you have the right to a corner? Yet we're trying to regulate it in words which don't make any sense.
Yep.
And so to me, I agree, I think we agree, that George was in the wrong here. But at the same time, I actually do agree. Checo was trying to make a world beater move happen out of the blue. He probably should have held off. It was on George. But a 5-second penalty is nothing. If that's me, I'm going to just keep driving like I'm driving. And see you later, Checo. Now I have a much better race to the front. I don't know. It bothered me the whole way the thing went down. The right person was penalized. It wasn't enough. They need to do a better job at figuring out who has the right to a corner, or just call it a racing incident and don't have the language. I don't know.
Yeah, no, agree. And then something amazing happened. Max didn't drive off into the distance.
Yeah, what happened?
Suddenly Charles is pulling him in, and the DRS is activated, and suddenly Charles is down to 0.8 seconds, and he's hunting him down. And we had this from lap 3 to about lap 13. He was getting closer, throwing shimmies up the inside. And the commentary team were kind of trying to make out that Max was doing it on purpose. Oh, he's just driving within himself to let Charles think he's got a chance, but he's just keeping it at arm's length. And on lap 13, Charles said, "No, you're not." And just fantastic move. And Max pitted really early. I felt
early
at the time, right?
Yeah,
it was like.
agreed.
I thought he had a problem actually at this point when he bailed him, which made me really happy because I knew you'd mega drived him. So I was kind of hoping he was retiring at this point.
I was a little concerned. I mean, you would go longer than that on a stint on softs.
Yeah,
and those are mediums. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah. So kind of that happened, and then what started to unfold was just like this amazing, not Silverstone level, but last week me and you had both said, Austria won't be another Silverstone, but if it can just be the best version of itself, then we'll be in for a great race. And I think we got that because we had so much overtaking action. We had number of cars. I mean, we'll come to it later. There was an instant when we had 4 cars wide going into corners, which was insane. But Haas, oh my gosh, Haas they
boys.
were getting racy everywhere. We had Lewis on Mick, but he was going to come back to him later. But then Lewis did a fantastic double whammy where he got Mick, and on the next lap he got K-Mag. We got a gazillion track warnings thrown in and some black and white flags for good measure as well. But there was just lots of midfield action. It was just It was superb.
I love the fact that the Haas boys were together. It
Yeah.
felt like they were a team, even though they weren't racing together. They were racing each other and the rest of the field. But every time someone would come up to them, it's like, oh, you want to pass me to get to my buddy? I don't think so. And I know Lewis got through, but it felt like they were tackling, they're going after Esteban. It was fun to watch the two of them. And you could never tell who was on who because unless you saw the full three-car situation, if they were battling, it was great. Gunter Steiner is loving it. There were a lot of great Gunter memes after the race.
And then,
From the Steiner ship to like everything else is, anyway, sorry.
No, that's fine. And lap 18, Max had been in and was hunting people down, and who did he come up across? Yep, Lewis. Lewis wasn't going to be able to hold him off for long, but he made sure he did make it easy for him. There was a couple of times where he properly slammed the door, but he couldn't delay the inevitable completely. But then, Max went about his business trying to narrow the gap down to the Ferraris, and then we got it. This is what I was talking about. It was lap 25. And I wrote down my notes. There's about 100 cars battling for position at the moment. No, it wasn't, but it was 5 cars. It was Alonso, Norris, both Haas, and Yuki Tsunoda, and they were all within like a millisecond of each other, and there was just cars everywhere. They were following, they were overtaking. I don't know which corner it is on this track, but there's the corner where they throw the move up the inside. The other car kind of lets them have it because they know that on the drive on the out of the corner, they're going to get it on the inside and do the switcheroo. And that happened a number of times, but it didn't seem to... I'm not saying F1 drivers are thick, but no one ever seemed to learn from this. They kind of fly down the inside and go, yeah, I've got it, I've made the pass. And then they go, oh no, switcheroo. But it just happened so many times. It was amazing. My biggest cheer was their lap later when Mick took Alonso, and it was a great move down the inside. But we won't dwell on that because
then Mick passed K-Mag. But then one of my favorite parts of the race.
Yeah.
And by the way, you called him Tsunoda. It's Yuki Tsunoda. But anyhow,
whatever.
We'll edit that out. No, wait, we don't edit. And so Fernando, God, I'm so happy he's still racing. He goes onto the grass to pass Yuki. He's on the grass, and I don't mean like a corner of the tire. At one point, it looks like both tires on the right side of the car on the grass. He gets back onto the track. I still don't, in all seriousness, I don't understand. We should have asked, maybe we did ask Jacques this, but at 190, 200, 210 miles an hour, how do you park your car in a couple inches from the car next to you when that car is moving around as well? I don't know how they do it. It is precise. It is amazing. And Fernando did that on the grass, gets next to Yuki, and then when he's on the track, waves his finger at him. And the onboard caught it perfectly live. And Crofty loved it. It was almost a Lance Stroll Monaco situation.
What has happened?
Exactly. We don't know Crofty. It was so good. Fernando, you're welcome to be on the dirty side anytime I want to hear about this finger waving. It was amazing. That was probably one of my 2 or 3 highlights of the race.
And I think it was testament to the racing that was going on throughout the whole field is that this isn't because nothing was happening at the front that we were concentrating on the midfield, which is what sometimes happens when the race up at the front has become boring, because they would show something like that and then have to flick back again because you've got like the Ferraris and the Red Bulls going for it. Max came in again, lap 37, and it was like, okay, this is now going to put the spotlight on Ferrari because Red Bull are obviously not 100% dominating this circuit like we've seen them do in the past.
Which was weird to me. I was expecting
weird to me as well. Yeah, absolutely. But they go in, I'm sat at the bar, and one of the guys is a huge Ferrari fan. He's like, oh, this is when Ferrari are going to pull a Ferrari and completely ruin this.
Oh, no.
He was just like, Red Bull are there for the taking. Max has gone in early. If Ferrari can kind of eke this out for a few more laps, they're going to have much fresher tyres come the end. This is all pointing towards a Ferrari 1-2. What's going to go wrong? So let's hold that thought for a few minutes. But we had Vettel. It looked like Vettel had lost it because they showed a donut that Vettel was doing in the middle of the track.
A little reversal even before the donut. And then the announcer was like, "Oh, he's just pretending it's front wheel drive." I'm like, Yeah, okay. That's one way to look at it.
Who did he actually come into contact with? I didn't note that down, but he hit someone, right? Or someone hit him, and he wasn't happy. So
Someone hit him, yeah. I think it was Jacques Villeneuve. I can't remember.
yeah, it was, yeah.
And then the Haas boys are back at it again on Lance Stroll. We need a banjo. The Haas boys are at it again.
It was awesome. Mick took Lance. I mean, Lance held. Actually, to be fair, Lance held his own for a while there. I thought Mick was going to kind of gobble him up quite quickly, and Mick got him, and then Lance got him back again. But then all of a sudden, it was just kind of like the resistance was broken. The Haas boys beat him down, and they both got him within about a lap, wasn't it?
This is going to be like the most unpopular opinion of the podcast, but I feel like Lance is getting better. I know he didn't, perform in the rain in Canada in quali like we thought because he's a rain guy, and we've seen other stuff throughout the year that hasn't been. But he's not as bad as a relative term. He's one of the best drivers in the world, bar none. But when you look at the other 17 people ahead of him normally, he feels like he's not making the same Lance Stroll mistakes we've seen in the past. So that battle and the way he held them off, I thought it was really good. I thought it was strong Lance driving.
Agree.
It's the alcohol talking. I don't know. But sign me up. Lance Stroll, here we go.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And then
now it gets spicy.
It gets spicy. Lap 50, Charles Pitts. One of my buddies, we've had him on DRS, he kind of pings me and said, what are Ferrari doing? They're throwing it away again. And I went back to him straight away and said, no. They've eked out this distance now that they're going to come out on much fresher tyres. He is going to hunt Max down. If they'd have left it too much longer, there wouldn't have been enough time potentially to hunt him down. But this is perfect. And he did. This bit, Ferrari got absolutely on the money, I would say. Charles came in.
Who was rocking up behind him to also take Max? His teammate, Carlos, rocking up right behind him to take Max. And then, what happened?
And you can't. Well, can you blame Ferrari for this? Ultimately, they manufacture.
They make the car,
but
it's the works
But hang on a minute. Ferrari have been getting a really, really bad rap recently for poor strategy. Today, I think their strategy was completely on point. They brought Charles in at the right point. Yeah. They brought Sainz in at the right point.
Yeah.
He was chasing Max down. He was almost within DRS zone, and then the engine let go. And my heart sank.
The day before, they screwed up strategy in the sprint by letting themselves fight each other and forget to fight the rest. Today, they got the strategy right, and reliability came back to bite them. And if you haven't seen my tweet as the Twitter intern, it's the little girl standing in front of the fire, but now in front of Carlos's car on fire because, oh my God, that thing exploded. I read it was the engine manifold. Holy crap. When they showed the replay, it actually blew out the sides of the side pods, the scallop side pods. And then the fire spread so fast, and he couldn't get the car to hold on the hill. And he wasn't about to get out. I don't think he knew how close the fire was around him. And
it was worse than that. No one seemed to come help him. He's like, I've got a car that's on fire.
He's actually waving. He's waving. Yes,
and that guy comes over the world's smallest piece of wood and tries to put it under a tire. I'm like,
it's a doorstop. It's a doorstop from my kindergarten classroom. It's like, here, we'll try this. Will it stop your car? No? Oh, that's all right. We'll try another one. I mean, what? God, yeah, but I think I read that was Carlos's 4th reliability DNF this season already.
Yeah, and then actually, the virtual safety car came out. I was about to ping you, then I realised you were on a plane, so there was no, you were in bed, so there was no point, early on the West Coast. So I was like, we know this is going to turn into a real safety car because they don't do virtual safety cars without promoting it to real safety cars. but they didn't. But for once, they didn't.
This one worked fine. I actually thought they were really far off track, and I recognized their quote in the line of fire, and Martin even came up with an idea. Well, if someone loses their brakes, and then a gust of wind hits them, and a Monarch farts, and then they'll blow them right. I'm like, come on, man. This is a VSC. Like, you can put a car out there. You're fine.
Exactly. So, okay. Then you're thinking, well, is Charles going to have a reliability issue? And you're like, well, hang on. He took a brand new engine and a new power unit, so his power unit's going to be fine. And then cue team radio. Something's wrong with my throttle. And you're like, oh, no, not again. And it sounds like, I don't know if another butterfly flew in there and got stuck in the throttle mechanism, but it sounded like when he lifted off the throttle wasn't coming back up again. So they were telling him at first, lift your foot completely off. Don't just I'm guessing here, don't just, as I would do in my car, lift from the heel and let the spring of the throttle push you back up. Properly lift your foot off as much as you can and let it spin back up.
They even made it sound like dig your foot under it and pick it up.
And then it was like, no, I'm digging it under and I'm picking it up. And it's like, yeah, and my downshifts aren't working. And they're like, yeah, that's because the car still thinks the throttle's high. The throttle's broken, so your downshifts aren't working. You're like, this isn't going to make it. This is just not going to make it.
And then one of the commentators said the FIA would not like to hear this. I mean, go back to Canada again for the second time. Magnussen had the front end plate on his wing flapping, and he got a black and orange. Like, come in and fix that. That's not that big a deal. That just reduces some aero, and a little piece, yes, I know it could get lodged under someone's floor and pull a Alpha Tauri Verstappen, but, I mean, that's not like a safety hazard to anyone. This is a real effing safety hazard, not just to Charles, but to the rest of the cars on the track. If he can't stop going into a corner, if he can't get his car to stop, if he can't arrest his throttle, that's crazy. You now have a guy who's incredibly talented out there using his foot to push the gas, pull up the gas, use the brakes, and he's shifting both paddles. He's got 77 buttons. He can launch missiles from his steering wheel, and he has to do all this. And he's calling in to home base, hey, I got a little problem out here. Is you seeing this too? I'm like, I'm really surprised. Yuki Tsunoda put some duct tape on his car, and they freaked out in Baku. But Charles is going around leaning into his car, lifting the pedal up and down. I mean, give me a break. Like, honestly, that was the most dangerous situation, if it is what we understand it is at this time.
Yeah.
How did a black and orange not come out for that?
I don't know.
It shouldn't. I don't want him to ruin the race. But at least let's have some standards. Like, duct tape on a rear wing, who cares? You know, end plate flapping, who cares? Guy can't stop his car, that's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, his brakes was working. It's just the throttle might have been working at the same time. But yeah, and then, I mean, all that you can say is, not quite sure what was happening at Red Bull, but even with all that going on, Max never really did.
You're right.
He was eating into it at like a tenth a lap. So there was never really, even when it got down to 2.9 and the commentary team tried to make it sound like there was this big chase down coming. It's, and Max is now down to under 3 seconds. I'm like, we got 2 laps left. He's not even in DRS yet. I mean, unless something actually goes bang on Charles's car, Max just didn't have the pace to catch him today, even with Charles having a broken car. So when he went over the line, much relief. I was very happy. I like Max. I just want this championship battle to keep going. So it would have been good. Sainz would have definitely got him. They would have definitely had a 1-2.
Right. That
would have really helped the championship. But, you know, all in all, I think a fantastic Austrian GP. We had Ferrari back on top. They didn't screw any strategy up. Yes, they had reliability issues, but just goes to show that when people were looking at the next 3 races and they were saying, well, Austria is basically a gimme for Red Bull, and then Ferrari will be able to come back in France and Hungary, which tend to be circuits they do well in. Well, that didn't go to script. So if France and Hungary do go to script and Ferrari do well there, you know, it might not all be done and dusted by the time we hang up our podcasting mics for the break, right? So
agreed. And last thing before we hear from Paul, Pit Lane Paul, obviously kudos to Mercedes, 3rd and 4th. They have done a hell of a job rebuilding that car to get it to a point where it can actually score points regularly, have pace. Yeah, you know, they're not quite at the pace of Ferrari and Red Bull, but they're there hanging on for scraps every time. I love it. Alpine, we've talked about this a couple times. Alpine has a very fast, high-speed car. And at a circuit like the Red Bull Ring, where you have less downforce needed and it's more high speed, quicker laps, the Alpine really shone well. And Fernando and Esteban both in the points. But we have to highlight the fact that we had a 2 points finish for the second weekend in a row for the Steiner ship. The Haas boys finished 6th and 8th. Mick was 6th. Mick F. Schumacher finished 6th. Gotta love it.
And do you know what that means, Brian?
Yeah, they went over 30, and you were a brilliant genius from the beginning.
They went
right?
over the 30 points that I predicted when we first started this podcast, and when I went out with that crazy-ass prediction that Haas would get more than 30 points, and we're not even halfway, and they've done it. And I'm just so happy for everybody at Haas. I think it just feels like a real good news story with those boys, and I really hope something has kind of... It just feels like something's kind of, whether it's self-confidence or whatever it is, but something just seems to have clicked in Mick's head, because ever since those points last week, like, he looked feisty in qualifying, he looked good in sprint, apparently. I read the report. And then he brought it home in the race. So, yeah, long may this continue. I think the Haas boys are looking good, and they're a good news story on the grid when we've got some other rubbish kind of hanging around the outside of the F1 at the moment.
I love your prediction, and I'm really happy you made it, and
It's going to haunt me for life.
And so if we move on to...
Before we move on to Paul, one thing.
One last thing.
Okay,
McLaren.
Okay.
McLaren.
Okay.
We have to give a shout out to McLaren. They have been good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. Lando's 7th, and now Lando's done really well at the Red Bull Ring, so 7th isn't great for him, but in this garbage can of a McLaren, that's amazing. And Danny Rick, who we wrote off earlier from Quali, finished 9th in the points, double points for McLaren, double points for Haas, double points for Alpine. You have to love it. This was a great race. Rob, anything you want to talk about before we go to Paul?
I do, but it's something I think we missed from last week, which is about Alonso, because we got so caught up in the amazingness that was Silverstone that we wrote the note down, but I don't think we covered it out, which was that Fernando, making it to lap 44 last week.
Oh, yes.
Became the leading distance driver, I think, in F1, like in the history of the world ever. So obviously by carrying on today has just added on to that. So that's just old father time doesn't seem to be catching up with him too much. And I really think that as Alpine keep improving and keep giving him a car that's going to sometimes be a little bit brittle, like it was, and he had to start from the back. But it's got the pace that it's got. I don't see him going away next year.
You know, the funny thing is, one of us predicted Alpine would have a bad year this year, and of course I was joking. Nailed that prediction. Pit lane Paul, are you out there? I have not heard the report.
Hey guys, that's Austria done. Where do we start with that race? So it sort of ebbed and flowed. It got quite exciting at times, and then it sort of, I don't know. I think it was good. I'm going to say that much. So let's break it down. Sprint race is always good. The sprint races work. I like them. I think they're quite exciting. They're quite entertaining. The battle at the front was good. Red Bull seemed to have some serious, I can't say pace issues, because like 1 minute they were slow, next minute they were good. Ferrari'd themselves. I mean, Sainz is just, he's unlucky. But I mean, like, yeah. And then it was a bit exciting at the end with those two guys. But it was good to see actual fights going on at the front, some overtakes. You know, it was quite a good strategy battle, I guess, between the two teams. But Ferrari did just have the legs on them today. Mercedes keep doing what Mercedes do, and yeah, they might not have the quickest car, but you know, they arguably take home the most points from the weekend with the finishes. So it's an interesting thing at the front with reliability. Perez, I mean, yeah, it's unlucky from his side. It's an overtaking move that has gone wrong several times. It went wrong twice in the same race. I mean, they had it for years ago with Albon on Lewis. You know, it's a risky move go around the outside there. I mean, the guy on the inside is always going to get the penalty because you are in front. That's just, yeah, that's the way that goes. But it's always brave, it's always risky, and he ruined his race as a result. So that's sort of the top view covered. Ocon, solid race, just did his job, just sat there, took advantage. McLaren, they actually went okay considering they didn't have the pace on Friday, so an actual good weekend for them. And you know, it's not confirmed yet, but we should inherit 10th place from Alonso because he had an unsafe release, which should impact his race next week because he should get a decent grid penalty for that as well, so that'll be interesting to see. Apart from that, it was quite exciting. Lots of little nice battles in the middle when I think it was Joe, Albon, I can't remember who was in it. There's like 4 cars racing into different corners side by side. You know, for the Austrian Grand Prix, it was actually quite exciting. It was quite a good one. I'm quite happy I sat and watched that one. And Austria is a great little country. It's one of my favourite places we go to on a calendar. It's so beautiful and picturesque here. You know, if anyone ever gets the chance, you know, It is it is well worth coming to this race. It is pretty good, and you can send a postcard home because apparently the first postcards in the world were actually done in Austria, which is quite entertaining. And then apart from that, other boring facts: 62% Austria is covered by Alps. They have the oldest zoo in the world. The sewing machine was invented here, and they do have some famous residents who, like Arnold Schwarzenegger and various other mass murdering people. Apart from that was the Austrian Grand Prix. Hope you enjoyed. Bye-bye.
Oh, Pele Paul does not disappoint. The facts are, first of all, the race recap is obviously gold, but the facts are fantastic. 68% are covered by Alp. Is that what I heard? Something like that. Amazing.
He's got that review sewn up. But breaking news: since Paul recorded that and sent it over, Alonso has escaped penalty. They've reviewed that pit. This for anybody that wasn't sure what Paul was referring to. Alonso came in for a pit, went out. His wheel came loose and he came straight back in again and did another pit stop. And they were saying that it must have been an unsafe release, that the wheel wasn't secured correctly before he was allowed back out. The FIA reviewed all the videos and said that no, even the body language of the guy that attached the wheel looked like everything was all hunky-dory. So it didn't look like it was an unsafe release. So Bottas doesn't get promoted from 11th to 10th, so he didn't get that point. So, I'm not sure Paul will be as happy with the Austrian Grand Prix now, but gotta love those facts.
Well, as we said, and I had not heard his recap, it was a good Austrian Grand Prix. So, moving to fantasy quickly. We'll do this fast. It's not worth noting that I finished first. Rob finished 42nd in the league. That's a differential of 41 places. We can just write that off to my Mega Driver, even though that's not the full reason. But the top five...
It is the full reason.
The top five this week from the Austrian Grand Prix are, number one, Brian S. with Team SAP. Sounds good. I bet they're good. Number two is Roman M. Rampuri F1 team. Number three, Jacob Z. Jacob Z Team A. Number four, Daniel Y. with one of my favorites, the Booty Bandit Club. And number five, Paulie G with Team 1. So original, Paul. And so, I know Paul, so I can say that. So, it was a good week. For me, I used my Mega Driver. And I used it on Max.
And
I had
also,
to use it eventually.
Yeah, I know you did. And with that in mind, we caught up and we found your dirty little secret, didn't we, this week, Brian? Because we caught up with...
yes.
I mean, he's got a great name. We caught up with a guy, Rob, that looks after a fantasy... basically a fantasy tips Twitter account, which apparently you've been using our Twitter account to interact with for the last few months.
All the time. He's the
All
best.
the time. So what we found out is you've essentially been cheating, and you got called out on it when we met Rob. So let's listen in and see how catching up with Rob on 100 Seconds of DRS went.
All right, we are super excited to have Rob with us on the podcast. Rob is, if you're not following him, you need to be, at F1 Fantasy Hub. It is something I follow all the time, interact with all the time. I learned so much about my fantasy team at F1 Fantasy Hub. Rob, thanks for joining us, man.
Brian, thanks for having me. Rob, thanks for having me.
I thought you were talking to me then, Brian. I thought I'd started up a Twitter account about F1 stats. I didn't even know I'd done it.
I certainly wouldn't have been as excited to have you on. I'm excited to have him on.
At the rate F1 Fantasy is going, I wouldn't be surprised if you have your own Twitter page by season's end.
Well, so this is, sort of an exciting topic, as the Dirty Side has had a fantasy league going since the beginning of the year, and we have a good number of the listeners participating, and it's just fun. It adds an extra dimension to following the races and the teams. So I guess, Rob, tell us a little bit how you got into both the fantasy aspect, but also the Formula One aspect, and which one kind of came first for you?
Yeah, great question, Brian. I think for me anyway, given that, as the listeners will probably tell, I have an accent from Australia, and the broadcasts for Formula One for as long as I've lived in Australia have more often than not been at a horrendous time zone. So getting up at 2 a.m. sometimes to watch a race isn't always practical when you have work the next day. But I suppose my affinity to F1, like a number of people, developed more through Drive to Survive. I was a casual follower for at least the last 5 or so years. And then having, I guess, the Netflix documentary to run alongside the season or before the season was an added bonus. But I guess from the fantasy perspective, I've played fantasy sports for more than half my life, starting from rugby back in Australia through to the English Premier League, fantasy NBA, and American football here in the US, and in the last couple of years, F1 fantasy. So I thought it was a natural progression to want to kind of evolve that interest. And the last kind of 3-4 months, it's continuing to grow, and the community itself is growing. So it's a really exciting time there.
It is a lot of fun to watch your commentary on who's going to be doing well, what the values are, who's moving. And as I said, in case I stuttered, I may have. It was at F1 Fantasy Hub. Definitely got to check it out. So, I guess as we were talking before, you watch the races now in the States. You live in New York. And as you kind of get ready for each race, I guess I'd be curious, as you think about the game, the F1 fantasy game, what's something about it you like, given your fantasy past, and what's something about it maybe you don't like as much? Because Rob and I, the other Rob number 2, we've had debates about the game over the course of this year, but I'd love kind of your thoughts because it's really, your wheelhouse.
Definitely, yeah. I think the obvious one, and this is an extension of the sport itself too, is just the potential for it. Because if I take the English Premier League and Fantasy Premier League as a prime example of something that's exploded in the last kind of decade or so, the growth of the sport is only going to benefit F1 fantasy too. And I think the thing that sets it apart from so many other sports is you only need to choose 5 drivers and a constructor. It's much less complicated than having to choose a team of 11 football players or 7 or 8 basketball players or whatever it might be. And even for I guess a less committed player, you don't have to put as much thought into the team, and you can still have a really successful week, particularly if you're going with those set and forget options like Leclerc and Red Bull or Ferrari, Checo Perez. So it makes it a lot easier for people who have probably less of a vested interest in the game to pay closer attention to it, rather than having to put hours into thinking about how to construct an 11-a-side football team, for example. And I guess the other thing which is really interesting to me, which is probably very different to a number of other fantasy sports, is the dynamic pricing. I think this year's probably been a little bit of a mess with those bot accounts, as you guys probably know.
Yeah.
But I guess it's almost how I would describe it to some of my friends is like a stock market game for beginners, because you can follow assets that are going up, jump in on them early, catch the price rises, drop off an Ocon or a Verstappen right before they go down in price. So I guess that as well, it's different to a number of other fantasy games I've played.
That's the one thing for me where I can kind of see it both ways, where they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? For me, the prices don't move anywhere near enough. You look at someone like Hamilton that starts as being the most expensive driver. He sucks super hard for like 9 races and has gone down by about 50 cents. And so there doesn't really seem to be enough movement. However, if there was a lot of movement, the flip side to that coin is that because there aren't too many drivers to pick from and you have got a relatively small pool, if everybody could make hay while the sun shines while everyone's going up in Valley, before long, everybody would just have Max, Checo, Carlos, Charles, George, and then pick either Red Bull or Ferrari, and everybody would have exactly the same team because you'd make enough budget to afford everything. So that's my only bugbear with it. That I like it. I love it. I think it's got... I love that it's got potential to be better. I just think F1 at the moment aren't quite getting it quite right. I don't know. Add in the ability to pick a pit crew and get some bonus points for the fastest pit stop, or pick a team principal and come up with some points for that. I agree with you. You don't want an 11-a-side team that you've got to do all the workings of, but just feels like they're missing a trick here at the moment.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's somewhat too easy in many facets of it. And I did like the suggestion you guys made on Twitter the other week about those, alternative aspects to how you can score points, because, I think they've tried to evolve the point scoring system over the last couple of years to make it, I guess, more dynamic with where you can score points for your team. But in saying that, there's things like the DNFs or penalties or whatever it might be that are so significant to scoring that you can massive rank swing in 1 week. And I guess the last 2 weeks is a perfect example of that, where Red Bull and Perez have just kind of hit, or not Red Bull, but Perez hit the wall. A lot of people were on him as turbo driver. And the week before that was Ferrari. And, you can go from, take my case, for instance. I was 80,000, which isn't amazing rank by any means. And I've dropped 100,000 ranks in 2 weeks. So it's it's not ideal in many situations. And I'm sure they'll think of a way to improve it next year. But I agree, Rob. There's certainly some room for improvement.
And definitely the suggestion of how gambling, being able to double down and gambling on how many celebs Brundle gets to interview on the grid walk. I think that was...
or how many of them he misidentifies. What I just as Rob, we were talking before, and he said something, I'm just going to say it for you. Is that you enjoy some of the data aspects of it and the analysis. And something he glossed over, because the rest of us aren't all nerds, except I am, is you mentioned the bot accounts. And what was fascinating this race week, so since Canada, which has been a week and a half as of the time of this recording, is Williams, I think it was Williams, went up 7 clicks. So 7 times they went through the sentiment, were $700,000 up. And then Play On froze the entire game effectively over the weekend, trying to get out, this bot hacker type deal. And who knows if it's a rogue Discord server where people are like plotting. But it's just like you mentioned that. And that is, for me, that's the one downer to the game, is the randomness with which the prices change. It's not performance driven. It's like someone decides to pump and dump Zhou Guanyu. He goes up $400,000 and then everyone sells him off. Like that's my one beef with the game, if I had one, I guess.
Yeah, I'm on the same page there. It's certainly one of the shortcomings, I think, for it. There's, so many different ways you could think of circumventing this. And I guess the placeholder they have at the moment is to run those capture tests or whatever it is that they've got in place now. But I guess another way that they could think about doing it, although I wouldn't say it would be receptive by a lot of people, is having to choose a new team of 6 every week, and just you have a budget of $100 million flat the whole way through. And instead of having to build your budget, which I think in fairness is probably one of the better parts of the game when it's not being exposed, but it also encourages those players that are paying more attention to the week ins, week outs. And say, for example, Baku, a great circuit with long straights, favours Red Bull. You might want to pile in all on Red Bull 1 week, and then the next week it could be a circuit with shorter corners, or slow corners, should I say. And Norris might be a preferable pick for something like that. So it's there's something that can be said for how it works at the moment. And I think the pricing this season's probably been a little bit out of whack, because to get Leclerc for 18.8 at the moment is kind of making a mockery of what he probably should be valued at.
Right. Well, that was, I would love, any other type of tips, but the first one is a direct one for you. If I'm staring at my fantasy team for this week, and again, this will air on Sunday, so this is just inside info for Rob and I at this point. But if I'm staring at Charles and Checo, and they're, they're 400,000 apart, and I had to turbo drive one of them, who would you think about turbo driving?
I think for me, it's going to be Charles almost every week. The only reason I felt inclined to go with Perez last week, RIP my team, was
me too,
was just because of the grid penalties. I think Leclerc is always going to beat Sainz, is going to get those beat teammates points. The fastest lap he's got a couple times this season as well. And he's going to be, I hate the term team orders, but he's going to be prioritized if he's in a good position to win the race or compete with Max for that first place. So more often than not, I think I'm going to go towards Leclerc unless I see something in practice that discourages me from wanting to go near him altogether.
That's fascinating. I like how amazing analysis. This is like, I mean, can you come on every week? Is really the question I was about to have. So, Rob, any other tips for people listening? Things to think about or avoid, even because I know you've had things out there. Watch out for this, and I've watched out for it, and it's been helpful. So.
Yeah, I mean, I could go on all day, Brian, but I guess, but there's a couple of things that I absolutely would encourage any new starter or even casual to consider is, I think when building out a team, go with those proven assets that know can score you points each week. I'm not saying avoid Tsunoda or Joe at all costs, but not only are they not the best driver typically on that team, but have a history of inconsistencies or DNFs or whatever you want to call it. So having those reliable drivers that can get you points, and you look at Russell, who is the most reliable driver on the circuit this year. He's been scoring. He's been flying under the radar until recently with this double streak coming up. But get those proven drivers in that you know will always score you points. Leclerc, Perez, I guess, are two good examples of that. And then I guess going back to that other point, if you can't afford the best driver, go for those stronger drivers on the team that will get those big teammate points like Bottas or Gasly or even Magnussen. So yeah, they're probably like the names, a handful of names that I'd suggest. And then the other thing I just touched on was the streak that George has coming up, the double streak, which if he qualifies top 10 and finishes in the top 10 on race day, gets a bonus 15 points, which I think is appealing for me and for a lot of other players, but don't always necessarily feel like you have to go for a driver or constructor on a streak, because someone like Lando Norris, as great as a driver as he is, isn't always going to outscore Perez, even if he's on a streak and Perez isn't. So just something to think about. I know it's intended to encourage people and variety with selecting a team, but it can be a trap.
I feel like we've just got Brian's cogs whirring in his brain now. It's like he was already way too excitable about fantasy, and you've just taken him to another limit now. It's kind of, this is just going to be painful now. But now I've got an excuse for the rest of the season that if he beats me, I'll just say, well, you're in charge of the Twitter account. You've been on with Rob getting inside information again. So that kind of makes that whole competition null and void now. Or every time I beat him, it's even doubly satisfying because I'm fighting the system.
Or even before we were lucky enough to have Rob on right now, I actually created a model and I run Solver on it. And I mentioned this before, and I can solve for either points per million, overall points, a budget, or a variety of other factors. And it takes a while sometimes, and I have to walk away and come back while my computer runs Solver. Do I have that model? Yes. Has it helped me? Not once. So anyway, some things don't change. Yeah, let's actually shift gears a little bit. And I know, Rob, when we were talking before, you showed excitement about the 100 seconds of DRS, and are you still excited? And do you feel ready for your time in the 100 seconds of DRS quiz?
Am I excited? Absolutely. Am I ready? Let's find out.
Well, that sounds good. And so I'm going to be administering the questions, which means Robert Vale over there staring intently at his phone trying to figure out how to use the timer will be running the time. Rob Vale, are you ready to time us?
I am indeed. I'm going to count you guys in, okay? So here we go. In 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, what is the first poster you had on your bedroom wall?
Cosmo Kramer from Seinfeld.
Yes. What is that? Is fantastic. What's your favorite restaurant?
Outback Steakhouse.
Solid.
Follow up on that one. Mario or Luigi?
Mario.
Who's the best F1 driver on the grid today?
Max Verstappen.
Who is your favorite F1 driver of all time?
Mark Webber.
What is the best racing movie of all time?
Ford vs Ferrari.
Oh, so good, so good. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yes, it absolutely is.
Oh, very good. We'll have to revisit that a little bit as well. What's your favorite non-motorsport sport?
Basketball.
What? NBA, college? What,
yeah.
Okay. And then, I'm allowed to ask a follow-up. I'm administering the questions. What is your favorite fantasy championship you've ever won?
Basketball, NBA.
Sleep in or up early?
Oh, absolutely sleep in.
Very good. Do you have any lucky superstitions?
None that I'm aware of.
Do you ever post anything to your Twitter account about fantasy formula and go, I think I just made that up?
I have once before.
DRS in Formula One, good or bad?
Yeah, good.
What's your favorite country to visit?
Hungary, Budapest in Hungary.
Oh, beautiful. A wet race or a dry race?
Wet race for sure.
And that's time.
Oh, all right. So Cosmo Kramer, first poster, that's fantastic. Which, was there a pose? Was it one of the ones that they showed where he was like looking regal, or was it the one like where he was in his underpants? Like, what was the one that was on your wall?
It was the one where he was painted. I think he was painted. I can't remember the name of the episode, but he's in a suit, looking very like formal and regal, as you say. And the caption underneath the poster was, he's a loathsome, offensive brute, but I cannot look away.
So Seinfeld is one of my favorite shows of all time. And a good friend of mine, Jeremy, was in New York, went on the Kramer reality tour, and I have a license plate that says Ass Man in my basement. I'm allowed to say that on the podcast, right? We're still clean, Rob?
Yeah, we are. I just do need to pick you up, and I have to apologise to Rob that for some reason Brian was asking those questions in like slow motion today, so we probably only got through half the questions.
I did follow-ups. It was a new thing. I invented something else called asking another question.
It was DRS. Good.
Well, part of the problem is I haven't had any alcohol today, so I haven't greased up the wheels. That was awesome, Rob. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on, to sharing your insights on fantasy. Thank you so much for doing the 100 Seconds of DRS. I just want to say this one more time, and I'm not kidding. It's a great follow on Twitter, at F1 Fantasy Hub. Check it out. Subscribe, follow along to all of his updates for notifications. It's awesome. So just thank you for participating today.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been awesome, and as always, I look forward to the new episode every week with bated breath.
See, that's a good solid Rob reaction. Big fan of that.
All right, Rob, thank you so much. That's awesome. As we said, follow him on Twitter, F1 Fantasy Hub. We talked a little bit about this to start. We're going to talk a little bit about it to close. Next week is not a race week, but it is a Jacques Villeneuve week here on the Dirty Side. So, Rob, can I tell a story? Do you want to tell it? Do you want?
You start it off, Brian. Let's go.
All right, I'll start it off. If you, an F1 fan like us, a dirty sider like us, want to know how the 1997 World Championship was actually decided, something you've never heard before, you have to be here next week at this time to listen to our podcast, because a guy...
This is Jacques Villeneuve, and you're listening to the Dirty Side of the Track.
Is going to tell us how it happened. It's an exclusive. That's the exclusive sound. I don't have one yet.
I like the exclusive sound.
Yeah,
do you know what? And that was a really cool moment because we didn't know what we were doing. We had no clue how to really do this. And then to kind of get the feedback that our questions had been fairly original and we covered some ground that he hadn't actually been asked before. I was pretty happy. I was going to take that one. I'm going to dine out on that forever.
Done.
But the story told us about the moment and that incident in the title decider. Now that was pretty cool. So no more teasers we can give on that. You're just gonna have to wait, and we've been waiting for this for 2 and a bit weeks now since we recorded it. So you can wait one more week, and you can listen to the Dirty Side of the Track interviewing world champion Jacques Villeneuve. Yes, Jacques Villeneuve on the Dirty Side of the Track next week.
Everybody, thanks so much for listening. It's a pleasure to be part of the Dirty Side with you all. And check it out next week. It's going to be momentous. Bye.